It's the week ending Saturday, the 23rd of December, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Damien Green sacked from Theresa May's cabinet, Donald Trump making sweeping changes to the US tax system, and Australia winning back the Ashes in Perth. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me in resplendent voice, you'll note, compared to last week, from the week's digital team are Holden, Frith, Jamie Timson and Kari, Wilkin. And starting the show this week, it's Jamie. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Was this the week the EU ended up poles apart?
What's interesting is what you mentioned already, which is semantics, meaning Poland is using quite harsh language. The foreign minister said Brussels' actions amount to harassment. And Brussels is piling on brutality that is unprecedented. So it seems that there's not much new in this conflict, meaning Poland is not changing its position by iota, and appears that it believes that escalating the conflict is reaping its political benefits.
Marek Strzelecki there of Bloomberg News reporting from Warsaw. And Jamie, this week the EU threatened to remove voting rights to the Polish government. Why?
Yes, they've given them 3 months to respond to the challenge. Otherwise, they have said they will strip Poland of voting rights. The main issue comes from the fact that since 2015, a party called Law and Justice have been in charge in Poland. They are not the cuddly soft liberals, despite their name. They have more recently brought in a series of changes to the judicial setup, which would give their government more power over choosing who's in the judiciary and who decides the laws. The EU have said that this is not respecting one of the fundamental tenets of the European Union, which is the rule of law, because we don't want politicised judges, basically.
So what's the current system? How do they appoint judges at the moment in Poland?
The Supreme Court is chosen amongst judges, but what they want to do
how's that more democratic, though?
It's more democratic because it's independent from... You're separating courts from government.
So, I mean, it's independent, but it is an elite choosing themselves. I mean, is that necessarily better, worth fighting about, than a democratically elected government choosing the judges?
But at least overall, you're spreading the power. It doesn't all filter back to one body.
The issue here is that judges are meant to be holding the executive to account, and different countries have different ways of sort of establishing that independence. We follow, at the moment, a similar system to Poland's, whereas in America, you do have more of a kind of blurring of the lines of politicising judges, but then having direct elections in some cases.
Exactly, but no one's saying that the US shouldn't take part in sort of international discussions. Obviously, they're not part of the EU, but if they were, no one would be saying the US shouldn't take part because of the way they elect their judges.
This is only part of a sort of a multi-prong attack on Poland's institutions, isn't it? They haven't just changed this. In the past 2 years since this party came to power, they've reduced the powers of the media, they've filled the civil service with their own party members, army.
Yeah, they've gone through this restructuring under the motto, the ends justify the means. Which
God,
again
everything about them sounds like a Fox News slogan, doesn't it?
Which again is a very lovely, cuddly, liberal message. But so they have been pushing for quite a long time to follow more of a kind of hard line, the state is right kind of way of looking at things. The EU have threatened to Article 7, which says if you do not adhere to our tenets of agreement, we will either sanction you in terms of the £1.2 billion that Poland receives in aid being taken away from them, or eventually stripping of voting rights. But, and there is a big but, in order for the EU to strip the voting rights from Poland, they would need universal consent throughout the whole EU 27, not us anymore. And
that is a big but, and I cannot lie.
And Hungary have already said, who are run by another semi-right-wing party, have already said that they're going to veto any move by the EU to remove. So actually, basically, the EU are a bit toothless.
Well, or liberal. like you suggested, maybe the EU is just slightly out of sync with the general trends rightwards of the last decade or so, and this is showing up in all kinds of ways.
I mean, part of the reason this could be a turning point of sorts is that Poland has really been seen as a success story of the EU up until now. It became much more democratic in the years leading up to its membership as it prepared itself. It's become a great deal richer since joining in 2004. But now it seems to be exposing one of the weaknesses of the EU, which is that it means very different things in different parts of it. So in France and Germany and what's called old Europe, it's maybe seen as this way of deepening political and social ties and projecting those sorts of liberal values. Whereas in Poland, I think perhaps a little bit like the UK, it's seen more as an economic bargain. And now that it's forcing some changes to the social fabric of Poland, that's creating a lot of resistance, particularly because Poland is much more socially conservative than the UK or most other Western European countries.
In November, they had the march, like a social conservative march that was pro-religion. There were lots of banners that said God is right, but among that crowd were a huge number of fascist right-wing slogans and banners, and it took Law and Justice, the party in charge, at least a week to condemn it. Like, they tried to move around. It was very Trump-esque in lots of ways in the way that they responded to this. But 60,000 people were on the march, so it was a big demonstration. So there is obviously a feeling, as Holden says, of a kind of a push towards more right-wing tendencies in the country.
They're actually a very popular government, despite these judicial reforms, aren't they?
As are
They've got low unemployment in most ways. Certainly day-to-day life is going pretty well.
Except obviously a lot of the reason that people voted for Brexit in this country was to do with immigration, a lot of it from Poland, ironically. Presumably on that point, the Poles are very happy to be part of the EU. I mean, they may not like the political direction they feel they're being led in, but equally, above all that, they want the right to go and trade in France and Germany, don't they?
Yes, economically it's been sensationally good for Poland. But immigration is an issue in Poland too. Last year in particular, when the migrant crisis was at its peak and there were a much larger number of Syrian and Afghan refugees coming in from southern Europe, and the EU was talking about quotas for rehousing refugees, Poland and Hungary were among the most vociferous opponents of that. It's currently a very monocultural country, and there's a lot of people there who want to keep it that way.
Now, Jamie, as we're recording this, our Prime Minister is in Warsaw. Do you think she's going to be pushed on this issue? Because it puts her in a bit of a pickle, doesn't it? Back the EU or not?
Yeah, her main objective of this trip is to sign a new security deal with Poland and to look forward ahead at post-Brexit relations between the two countries. There is a pressure, and there has been, and her spokesman said before she went that she would be bringing up the issues that the EU had.
Yeah, that means not in front of microphones, basically, doesn't it? Yeah.
But I think it kind of brings about a kind of bigger question about after Brexit, which is where we're now all looking. Where does the British see itself aligning its morals or ethics, and will we look to chase trade dollars? Because someone like Poland, should they fall out with the EU, would look to us as to continue trading relationships and stuff. And there is a bigger question that looks at, will we still be as stringent with our ethics when we're desperate for people to...
Will we be able to afford ethics?
Yeah, when we're, at the moment...
Hold on, the EU isn't stopping trading with Poland. They're stopping giving them voting rights, and Poland might think this is quite good for us, actually.
But that could be a possible sanction. I mean, losing voting rights would be the final step, wouldn't it? Before that, they could introduce economic sanctions.
We would take away their money, or the EU would take away the money going to...
But the UK couldn't trade with Poland unless it also left the EU.
No, exactly. But I think that from the perspective of looking further afield, there is an argument to say, should her aligning herself so closely to what is a government that perhaps doesn't follow the same ideals as us, perhaps suggests that maybe she doesn't really mind. It wasn't long ago that Liam Fox was talking about shared values with Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines, and always the way that we are going cap in hand to Saudi Arabia, considering their human rights issues.
After Brexit, we'll have to think about these questions in a way that we haven't really had to, because we've essentially outsourced trading negotiations and our conscience in terms of trade to the EU. Post-Brexit, all of those questions will be back on the table. So depending on which party, which particular politicians are in power, we may lean one way or another. But it will actually be an opportunity to kind of think about those questions in first principles rather than just sign up to whatever trade deal or other regulations, the EU has outsourced, and I think we've actually become quite lazy about really examining quite a lot of those issues, including things like tariffs against the developing world. That really means that agricultural products are subsidised so heavily within the EU that it's very hard for anyone else to get a look in.
Politicians have been able to effectively hide behind the EU, haven't they? It's just blame shifting, whereas now the Polish president this week accused the EU of hypocrisy. We're not going to have that buffer anymore. Britain could be accused of hypocrisy if it then continues these sort of sanctions once it's separate from the rest of Europe.
I'm just thinking about whether, if this led to Poland voting to exit the EU, whether that would be called Poxit.
Thankfully, we're probably not going to have to find out, because I think 11...
Plexit.
It's like a credit card.
There was a poll this summer that suggested only 11% of Poles want to leave the EU.
Good stat. You're up next, Holden. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
I have learned that tomorrow may be the day of the jackal, the bear, and the wolf.
No sound in nature has terrified people more. And no animal has been so intensely hated as the wolf.
The haunting strains there of the European wolf, as featured on the Animal Planet YouTube channel, where you can find lots of great documentaries. Holden, the wolf has been back in Europe for a few years now, so why is this your story of the week?
The news this week is that the wolves have been joined by golden jackals, which crossed the Alps and were spotted in France this week for the first time in living memory. This is, as you suggest, part of a much larger trend. So wolves were hunted to extinction in France in the 1930s. They returned in 1992 and are now established across the south and west of the country, and according to reports earlier this year, in the outskirts of Paris as well. Britain, because of the English Channel, has not had this natural process of rewilding, as it's called, but there have been deliberate attempts to reintroduce wild animals not seen here for, in some cases, hundreds of years.
Yeah, there was some campaign, wasn't there, to bring back wolves to help with a cull of some kind, I seem to recall.
There's a few different suggestions. The one that seems to be closest to fruition is lynxes.
That's right, yeah.
Lynxes, it looks as if they are going to be released in Scotland and possibly one or two sites in rural England next year. They are specialists at hunting roe deer, which at the moment are culled each year because they have no natural predators now that, well, since lynx and wolves have both been hunted out. Lynx haven't lived in the UK for something like 1,500 years. The last confirmed sighting of a wolf was in 1621.
Okay, Attenborough, interesting, but so what? I mean, why is this your story of the week? Who cares?
Well, we might all care if we start having to worry about wolves on the commute. It might be. But
Apparently they're actually quite shy, gentle creatures, I read, although I'm not entirely convinced.
they have very bad press. I remember having nightmares as a kid about wolves because so many fairy tales do seem to involve children being eaten by wolves. And I suppose that is because at one point that
blowing
was...
your house down.
Yes.
No discernible reason.
But they are... This movement is, it's supposed by a lot of people, particularly farmers, because wolves do eat a lot of sheep.
Oh, hold on. Are you saying that there is now deliberate strategy to rewild wolves in the UK, or are you just speculating that might happen because they're in France?
There is a campaign to do so. George Monbiot is one of the proponents of bringing back wolves to the
He
UK.
looks a bit like a wolf.
Maybe that's why he feels a kinship with them. The rewilding movement sets itself up really in deliberate distinction to the conservation movement. And the argument is that conservation is about picking a fairly artificial version of an ecosystem and actively preserving it. Mm-hmm. The idea of rewilding is that it's a much more dynamic, natural process, and you don't really know what the outcome is going to be.
Have you seen the video of the National Geographic of what they did in Yellowstone? In Yellowstone, they reintroduced grey wolves into the national park in 1995. And there's an amazing video that they put on Facebook, and it's very easy to search on all of your web video ways. And it basically shows how the actual fundamental geography of the park has changed because of the reintroduction of the wolf. So in terms of what it's eaten, the effect on the bio, the ecosystem, the new birds and ants and insects are all related to the reintroduction of the wolf.
To return to Kari's point about imagine if the wolves are on your commute, I mean, let's talk about cities for a second, because it's one thing saying, how the Highlands might change, but ultimately they would probably migrate down to London and Manchester and Birmingham and Glasgow and whatever. What impact might that have? Because they are a hunter, and we've already got quite a lot of foxes and not to mention rodents.
Well, actually, I mean, one of the reasons that we get big build-ups of small mammals like foxes is because there are no natural predators for these creatures. So one of the arguments that rewilders make is that you no longer have to intervene with human culls of these animals that are growing in numbers because you're replacing the predators that would naturally keep them in order. There is obviously going to be an apex predator at the top of that line that we might have to deal with at some point. One of the most astonishing facts...
That's a really troubling phrase that you just slipped in there, isn't it? An apex predator. What does that mean?
It's killer robots.
Is it... seriously, is it like a specially malformed wolf that's evolved to kill us? What is it?
One of the most astonishing facts I think I've discovered all year was during the research of this story, and that's that 12,000 years ago, which isn't that long in the kind of vast evolutionary scales, there were lions hunting reindeer across the British Isles.
I didn't know we ever had lions in the British Isles.
That's very Christmassy. Yeah. As well, lovely. Lovely Christmas story.
I don't think anyone's suggesting that we should reintroduce lions either, although I suspect George Monbiot might secretly want to.
Bring them all back.
Wolves have been introduced, haven't they, in a wildlife park in Devon? I mean, is that all going to be sort of an experiment to see what happens there, kind of a little mini test?
There've been a few small-scale attempts. I think there's another one in Sussex as well. And
should we not test what happens there first before we release?
Well, one of the interesting things is because it is a dynamic and unpredictable process, it can have very different effects in different places. And in some areas, there used to be the theory that if you left the English countryside to its own devices, it would essentially revert to forest. Whereas now, that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. You'll get pockets of forest. You have pockets that look more like a kind of African savanna. And then you actually get some that just looks like wasteland and is quite unattractive to the human eye. That's part of the reason why this is sort of set up in opposition to conservation, which tends to be about kind of human aesthetics to a certain extent and perhaps a slightly romanticised view of nature, whereas rewilding is a much more kind of brutal and hands-off approach.
The difference between conservation and rewilding, I just want to bring up my de-extinction idea, so that there has been a movement more recently to the idea of bringing back animals and creatures that went extinct, mainly because we hunted them. So things like the dodo and the mammoth and things like that. And it comes from the same idea as rewilding, which is that why have we decided that just because we killed off all of these things, they didn't deserve to live here? And it's already happening. So in Cape Town, they've brought back the quagga, which was a type of kind of subspecies, but it was a type of zebra that they've now brought back into existence by breeding zebras with the characteristics of a quagga, and it now exists.
Okay, but that isn't a quagga, is it? That's just a zebra.
Copy of a quagga.
So 100%
quagga-like zebra.
But it has all of the characteristics of a quagga, which is what they're going to...
I don't want a duck-like dodo or a dodo-like duck.
No, you do. You want a mammoth-like elephant, which is what they're aiming for.
No, I do want a duck-like dodo. I don't want a dodo-like duck. I want a dodo, if we're going to move out the dodo.
Is there not something slightly counterintuitive about we need to correct what we've done by meddling in nature, so let's meddle in nature?
It does sound like the beginning of a great number of sci-fi films.
But two wrongs sometimes do make a right.
Was that the tagline for Jurassic Park? I don't remember.
and for quaggers.
I mean, Kari, what you raised there is the point that there's a danger as well of complacency regarding extinction, current extinction, the problems we're causing for the world through man-made climate intervention. And if we lose an animal species, well, in 500 years, we'll just grow it back again.
Yeah, I know certainly Sir David Attenborough, he's spoken out against these plans, hasn't he? Because he said, look, let's stop messing with what we've done and just preserve what needs to be preserved, help existing wildlife stay alive.
No, bring it all back. Bring it all back.
The other way in which this might have a practical effect on all of us is the issue of agriculture and food production. And the world can only support the number of people currently living on it because of very intensive agriculture. And if we do turn over large amounts of space to wild animals, we're not going to be able to grow as much food. There is an argument that that's fine, we can import it from elsewhere, but that then becomes essentially we'd be outsourcing agriculture in the way that we've outsourced manufacturing, and we're sort of saying we want this sort of almost the indulgence of having wild space on our doorstep, and we're going to let everybody else kind of disrupt what may at the moment be pristine landscape and turn that over to agriculture so that they can feed us.
Should we eat the animals?
Yeah, McQuagga with cheese, please.
Well, game is often a very high protein and low fat source of food, so maybe that's the answer.
And we're saying, there's
Go back to a
shortages.
hunter-gatherer
Yeah.
lifestyle.
Kari, you're last this week. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Is it time to write off Christmas cards?
Mom, how do you know who to send Christmas cards to?
Well, there's the people you love,
My grandma.
like Grandma. And there's friends that you miss.
How about new friends?
Sure, that's especially nice.
I have someone I want to send a Christmas card to, okay?
Okay.
This Christmas, the people you love would love to hear from you. Don't forget them. Give Hallmark Christmas cards when you care enough to send the very best.
A 1980s ad for card manufacturer Hallmark played through the obligatory VHS filter. Kari, you're sitting next to Jamie. He usually turns up with the bollocks story. He's actually had a decent
I'm
political
taking that
story
mantle
this
this
week.
week.
You want to talk about Christmas cards?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I hate them. There was a story in the news this week about how the world's smallest Christmas card had been made. It's 200 million times smaller than a stamp, too small to be seen by the naked eye.
You're going to have to talk slower. I don't know what you just said. There's a Christmas card that's smaller than what?
200 million times smaller than a stamp. And
Why?
it's- Exactly. It's 15
It's,
microns, which is 1/1,000,000 of a metre, by 20 microns. And it's got a teeny tiny inscription on it of a snowman and seasonal messages. And it was done by scientists in London. Apparently, it's so small that 7 quadrillion could fit into the average size postage box.
It sounds like a scientist has come up with a very inventive excuse for not having sent Christmas cards.
No, it sounds a
Sorry.
bit like a press release, is what it sounds like.
basically-
Presumably someone wants to draw attention to their scientific
they
endeavours.
did this. They did it to
By
showcase the
pegging you to a
progress
Christmas
being
story.
made in materials research, the way they can now manipulate tiny materials to unlock new battery. And
Yeah, it sounds pretty boring.
semiconductor
Whereas a
technology.
Christmas,
Yeah, blah, blah,
tiny
blah, blah,
Christmas
blah.
card, yeah, exciting. Material development. Okay,
But
fine.
to me, it just sums up the utter pointlessness of Christmas cards. And, you've got Prince William revealing his family Christmas card this week and everyone going, oh, isn't it great?
Why wasn't she pregnant in it?
Maybe they photoshopped her. Am I allowed to say that?
That annoyed me. Just put up a picture of Kate being pregnant.
Do you know
like,
what-
it's fine.
Is she
it's
visibly
fine.
pregnant now?
Yeah,
How
absolutely.
what do you mean absolutely? How do you know?
Absolutely. She's what? She's
It's all over the place.
some months pregnant.
I'd actually forgotten she was pregnant, to be honest, with the whole Meghan and
I
Harry
thought
thing.
we were talking about
Markle.
Meghan and Markle. I was like, that's quite controversial.
Yes,
Step
she's
forward.
visibly pregnant. Okay, so why? I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't want to break our own format completely, but I mean, you've jumped from here's a scientist who's made a very, very tiny Christmas cards to you personally don't like Christmas cards to you saying this is your story of the week.
It just
What's
sums
your
up-
serious point?
It just sums up the pointlessness of
Does
Christmas
it?
cards.
Why? Doesn't it sum up the fact that
Because-
people from all over the world in different disciplines, whether they're royal or material
No one
scientists,
cares.
like Christmas cards?
It has
Political
become-
story like
it
me.
Yeah, what do they do in Poland about it?
It has become a loop of obligation. It's outdated. No one likes doing Christmas cards. No one cares.
Return
if
to
they
your
get
earlier
one.
point, Holden. This sounds like someone apologising for not sending Christmas cards. So have you not sent any this year?
I've sent about a dozen to people mainly to older relatives who I know would be bothered.
Do you do the round robin thing where you tell them about your life and times in your year?
no.
Send a
No.
link to the podcast. This is what I've been up to. 50 weeks of it, mate.
There is an official Christmas card day on the 9th of December. Again, it's all just one big manufacturing ploy. We waste so much money on Christmas cards. Apparently, even though spend on boxes of Christmas cards has fallen, we still spend 200 million a year. Spend on individual Christmas cards has risen by 61% in 5 years. And that's
Now,
another
why is that, then?
225
Is that
million.
because fewer are being sold, so the ones that are being sold are more premium?
Yeah, I guess so.
Or some people are just spending a lot of money on Christmas cards and then because like you see like Unite, the union,
Yes.
not to bang the drum for my people all the time,
Sure.
but they send Christmas cards out to everyone, every single one of their every single one of their members. So they must spend a lot.
Membership drops.
Yeah, and they must spend a lot of money on their Christmas cards.
Yeah, but why is it going up?
Because they have to keep doing... No, yeah, I don't know.
No, it's not relevant. Union politics has nothing to do with this. Surely it's also because charity is involved, is it not, Kari?
Well,
just to sort of pee on your parade for a second. Here you are saying, it's a waste of money. Isn't it terrible that money spent has gone up on Christmas cards? No, because some of that is going into lung cancer research. And someone's made a point of saying, I'm going to spend £4 a card.
Charities raise about 50 million a year from the sale of Christmas cards. And a lot of your charity Christmas cards, it's a tiny percentage that actually goes to the charity. There are now websites that allow you to send e-cards and they donate the money to charity. So you can still do all that.
Getting an e-card is rubbish, though, isn't it?
But do you open up your Christmas card and go,
I think if I didn't address that question to you, Kari. Holden, getting an e-card is rubbish, isn't it?
It is.
Yes, Jamie, it is rubbish, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it is, you see, that's why.
Is getting a paper card any better?
I think my attitude to Christmas cards depends entirely where I am in the cycle of Christmas card production and reception.
Do you send out Christmas cards?
I send out a few. I basically send out cards to the few people who, for the 5 years that I didn't send cards, kept persisting, and I now feel an obligation to do so. And I think in the kind of 2 weeks where I'm feeling I should be getting round writing cards, and then the relatively short amount of time of actually writing them, and then the much longer period of time of forgetting to buy stamps and then forgetting to post them, I really, really resent it. But the feeling of relief...
So much passion in the room. Don't interrupt me now, I'm in full flow.
The feeling of relief, having gone through that process of actually dumping them in a postbox, I think is worthwhile at the end of it.
Doesn't that show why it's so negative? The feeling of relief of that painful process makes all the pain worthwhile.
They had a list and they were like, Holden's not sent us a card again this year. Do you really think people are have they got a list? Are they checking it
I
twice?
like to think that I was the only person they were sending a card to. And each year they were just thinking,
sad,
will this be the year that he reciprocates?
But when you get a card, isn't there that fear? You don't go, nice card. You go,
I'm from a generation that don't do those kind of things.
Do you know what? Less than half of people under 34 send cards anymore. It's a dying tradition. It's time to just cull it. Let it go.
I do actually like getting cards from friends, particularly the ones I don't see so often. And I mean,
It's a bit,
that's bothered.
It's a different thing, though, isn't it? Because, yes, there are obviously people that you could ring and have a chat with, or there's one who you just think, good, they've thought of me. Even in that small period of time, they've thought about me.
Could they not just send a text like people do on New Year's Eve?
It's not got a funny picture of a Brussels sprout on the front in a Christmas
emojis.
Hat. I do have emojis, you're right.
I mean, why pray? God can read your thoughts anyway. I mean, there's lots of things about Christmas, aren't there, that have symbolic meaning, including sending a card. Surely.
But it started
It's a testament to the fact that you care.
No, it's not actually. It started. let's
Scrooge.
Destroy. They were created in 1843 by a man called Henry Cole, who was actually the founding director of the V&A, and he had fallen behind with his correspondence, which in Victorian times was considered very important,
very slovenly,
and therefore very rude. And he got an artist to create a card for him, sent it to about 1,000 people, and that was duty done. And then sort of within about 20 years, as people are sort of moving further around the country with industrialisation, all that taking hold, it was a good way of keeping in touch. So it had its place. But it started out as a duty thing, and that's what it's remained.
In the Times this week, Matthew Parris had a similar anti-Christmas card argument, and he concluded that too much of human existence turns out to be one equivalent or another of being forced to kiss aunts.
Yes, and it is that completely. And it's also really bad for the environment.
Kissing aunts?
It's all of that carbon dioxide.
Right. Well, if you can hear a little sound in the background, it is me tearing up Kari's Christmas card. But thank you anyway. Thank you as well to Olden Frith and Jamie Timson. That's it for our Christmassy edition of The Week Unwrapped. But next week is our very special 2017 review, where we look at all the trends that we've missed this year and what they mean for 2018 and beyond. For more from us here at The Week, why not visit theweek.co.uk, where you can also sign up to our free email newsletter, The Weekday, or of course you can have the magazine delivered direct to your door. Just head to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. It's better than a Christmas card coming through your flaps. All the past episodes of this show are available on our podcast feed. Just search for The Week Unwrapped on your app of choice. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, Merry Christmas.